Society pretends to admire intelligence. It builds statues of philosophers, quotes visionaries, and celebrates the brilliance of the past. But that's the trick. It loves intelligence only once it's no longer a threat. Nietzsche understood this contradiction. The truly intelligent, the ones who think originally, question relentlessly, and refuse to conform, they are rarely welcomed. At best, they're tolerated. At worst, they're ridiculed, isolated, or ignored. Why? Because intelligence disrupts. It sees what others miss. It refuses to believe simply because everyone else does. And in doing so, it forces the collective to confront truths it would rather avoid. The intelligent person doesn't fit easily into a group. They observe from the edge. They notice the subtle lies, the contradictions in the system, the hollowness in tradition. And that makes others uncomfortable. Not because the thinker is cruel, but because their presence is a mirror, and most people aren't ready to look. So, society develops a quiet defense. It labels the thinker difficult, arrogant, aloof. It turns their depth into a flaw. It makes eccentricity a punchline. Not to protect itself from the thinker, but to protect itself from the truths they carry. In this way, society doesn't fear intelligence in theory. It fears intelligence in the room. There is a limit to how much truth most people are willing to hear, and Nietzsche knew it. He saw that society values harmony, not honesty, comfort, not clarity. The deeper the thinker goes, the more they unravel the myths that hold civilization together. Religion, morality, success, identity. All the concepts people rely on to feel safe are questioned under the thinker's gaze. And that questioning is dangerous, not because it leads to chaos, but because it leads to awakening. And once people awaken, they stop obeying automatically. They stop consuming blindly. They begin to ask why. And worse, they begin to walk away from what no longer makes sense. Depth isn't threatening because it's dark. It's threatening because it's accurate. It exposes the smallness of the conversations we've accepted. It makes the trivial feel empty. It shows how much of modern life is distraction wrapped in ritual. The thinker doesn't try to cause trouble, but by merely existing, they do. Their questions are too sharp. Their silence is too loud. Their refusal to participate is too visible. And that refusal sends a message. There is another way to see. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't scream, they reveal. Society isn't built to celebrate the genius. It's built to protect the average. Conformity is the glue that holds large groups together. It simplifies life. It creates predictability. It lets people avoid responsibility by outsourcing their thinking. Nietzsche understood that genius threatens this structure, not because it wants to destroy it, but because it operates by different rules. The genius doesn't need approval. It doesn't fear solitude. It doesn't bend to fit in. And that independence terrifies the herd. Why? Because it breaks the illusion that safety comes from sameness. The genius reminds people that most of what they follow, tradition, morality, success, was built by someone no smarter than them, then passed down unquestioned. It exposes how much of life is lived by default. And so genius is seen not as a gift, but as a disruption. To keep things smooth, society has its tools: ridicule, dismissal, silence. It teaches people to value relatability over brilliance, agreement over truth, simplicity over depth. It makes too much a criticism, too intense, too complicated, too serious. This is how conformity protects itself, by making the extraordinary feel inconvenient. So while the genius offers insight, society offers discomfort in return. Not out of hate, but out of fear. Because what can't be controlled must be minimized. Intelligence often walks alone, not because it wants to, but because it must. Nietzsche knew this loneliness intimately. The more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to unsee. Conversations that once felt engaging now feel shallow. Social rituals that once felt comforting now feel hollow. And so, the intelligent drift. Not upward, inward. They aren't aloof, they're just tired. Tired of translating their thoughts into palatable sound bites. Tired of pretending not to notice what others ignore. Tired of being asked to explain what others aren't ready to hear. So, they retreat. This solitude isn't a failure of character, it's a side effect of clarity. When you value truth over acceptance, silence becomes preferable to performance. When you no longer seek validation, your circle shrinks, but your peace expands. And yet, the intelligent are not above the world. They simply sit beside it, watching, waiting, listening. Their solitude is not arrogance, it's survival. Because to stay in constant dialogue with a society that rewards performance over insight would be to betray their own mind. So they choose distance, and in that distance they find what society can't offer: space to think, to breathe, to remain intact. It's not that they don't want connection, they just won't trade their depth to get it. The intelligent don't set out to make others uncomfortable, but the discomfort follows them, like a shadow they never asked for. It's not what they say, it's what their presence implies. Nietzsche saw it clearly. Intelligence is a disruption. It carries an energy that asks for nothing but reveals everything. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't play dumb, it doesn't soften its edges just to be liked. And in a world where most people are busy maintaining their image, someone who refuses to play along becomes unsettling. The intelligent are rarely liked in the conventional sense, not because they're unkind, but because they won't perform. They won't pretend to care about things that don't matter. They won't engage in conversations that orbit nothing. They won't tolerate shallow dynamics for the sake of social ease. That makes others feel judged, even when no judgment is spoken. It's not personal. It's psychological. Most people seek mirrors, others who reflect back their ideas, their comfort, their worldview, but the intelligent aren't mirrors. They're windows, and windows don't flatter. They show you what's really there. Being liked requires compromise, but the truly intelligent don't compromise their core for anyone, and that's why they're respected more than they're liked. Mediocrity doesn't fight intelligence with reason, it fights it with ridicule. Nietzsche observed this instinct long before it became a cultural norm. When brilliance enters a room, average minds don't celebrate it, they protect themselves. Not with logic, but with laughter, with sideways insults, with passive dismissal disguised as humility. Too intense. Too deep. You think too much. These are not observations. They are warnings. Signals that your presence is no longer socially safe, that your insight has moved from interesting to threatening, and the collective begins to push back. Why? Because intelligence disrupts the fragile scaffolding mediocrity stands on. It questions systems. It reveals contradictions. It makes people aware of their own mental laziness. And awareness is uncomfortable, so mediocrity builds defenses. It promotes false equality. It elevates charisma over content, relatability over rigor, noise over nuance. It rewards the clever over the wise, the obedient over the original. And slowly, intelligence is not just ignored, it's punished. Not through laws, through tone, through silence, through the unspoken rules that say, if you want to belong, don't go too far. But the intelligent were never here to belong. They were here to reveal. And mediocrity knows it, which is why it fights so hard to make sure no one listens. There is a cost to telling the truth, not just the factual truth, but the deeper, more uncomfortable truths about human nature, power, belief, and identity. Nietzsche didn't fear that truth would be lost. He feared it would be ignored, or worse, punished. Intellectual honesty means saying what others only dare to think. It means challenging the accepted, not out of rebellion, but out of fidelity to reality. But society doesn't reward truth-tellers, it isolates them, because truth makes people look inward, and most would rather not. The intelligent person who speaks honestly doesn't just disrupt conversations, they disrupt self-images, cultural myths, political illusions. They introduce dissonance, and people don't respond to dissonance with curiosity. They respond with defense. You'll be told you're cynical, that you're bitter, that you see the world too darkly. But what they really mean is, you're too honest about what they're trying to ignore. So most intelligent people learn to carry their truths carefully. They speak in questions, in metaphors, in symbols. Because if you deliver truth too directly, people reject the messenger before they ever hear the message. This is the paradox. The more intelligent you are, the more careful you must be with your clarity. Not because you're wrong, but because they're not ready. To think deeply is to rebel, not because rebellion is the goal, but because truth almost always contradicts the dominant narrative. Nietzsche knew this. Every profound thought threatens something shallow. Every original idea destabilizes something comfortable. When you ask, why do we believe this? You're not just asking a question. You're questioning someone's identity, tradition, or authority. And even if your tone is calm, even if your curiosity is sincere, the reaction is often the same: resistance. Society confuses insight with insubordination. If you challenge religion, you're dangerous. If you question politics, you're ungrateful. If you dissect culture, you're pretentious. But thinking isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. The deeper your mind goes, the more aware you become of what's built on sand. You don't want to destroy it, you just can't pretend it's solid. And that makes people uncomfortable, because they don't want you to disagree. They want you to agree enthusiastically, and when you don't, they turn. You become the skeptic, the outsider, the threat, not because you shouted, but because you saw, and you didn't look away. There's a weight that comes with clarity, a silent heaviness that intelligent people carry, not because they want to, but because they can't unknow what they've seen. Nietzsche understood this. With greater awareness comes greater solitude, not out of pride, but out of necessity. When you see through the illusions that comfort others, you can no longer participate in them. The conversations feel thinner, the goals seem fabricated, the social rules feel more like performance than principle. And while others seem content to play along, you start to feel like a stranger in your own culture. The intelligent often appear distant, cold, or difficult. But what you're really witnessing is someone trying to live truthfully in a world that rewards denial. They don't hate people, they just can't pretend. They don't lack emotion, they just refuse to dilute their thoughts to fit in. This is the hidden cost of intelligence. Isolation, wrapped in insight. They see how society runs on convenience, not truth. They see the games beneath relationships, the self-deception in institutions, the emptiness beneath appearances. And while others laugh, the intelligent are still thinking, still carrying, still seeing. That's the burden. It's not being smart. It's being unable to forget what most are fortunate enough to ignore. Nietzsche didn't just believe that intelligence was rare, he believed it was dangerous. Not to the individual, but to the system. Because true intelligence births independence, and an independent mind cannot be governed. That's what makes the intelligent person so frightening to the masses. Not their IQ, not their vocabulary, but their refusal to be controlled. They don't need approval, don't fear solitude, and don't follow traditions blindly. That makes them unpredictable, and unpredictability is threatening to any structure built on control. The masses don't consciously reject intelligence, they reject the discomfort it creates. Because the intelligent ask, is this necessary? Is this true? Is this mine? And those questions are contagious. They spread, they infect, they awaken. An individual who thinks for themselves can't be sold the same illusion, can't be managed with the same tactics, can't be herded with the same fear. That's what society fears, not the person, but the ripple effect they create. And so, intelligent individuals are tolerated, but never fully embraced. Admired from afar, but kept outside the inner circle. Consulted for their ideas, but excluded from real power. Why? Because their presence threatens the collective sleep. The thinker becomes the outsider not because they turned away, but because they looked too closely. Society always has a place for the intelligent, just not at the center. Nietzsche understood that those who think differently rarely occupy positions of social intimacy. The intelligent are often advisors, observers, or critics. They influence from the margins. Their role is not to comfort, but to clarify, not to fit in, but to reveal. And that makes them both necessary and unwelcome. The outsider doesn't choose exile. They simply refuse to trade their vision for acceptance. They won't repeat what others want to hear. They won't hide behind collective thinking. And that refusal gradually pushes them to the edges of the social order. But the edge is not empty. It is where ideas begin. The outsider sees what those inside cannot. Because from the center, all you see is tradition, routine, and repetition. But from the edge, you see the whole shape of the thing, its patterns, its weaknesses, its illusions. That's the power of the outsider. Their distance gives them clarity. Their solitude gives them strength. They're not corrupted by the need to be understood. They're not softened by the pressure to belong. They influence culture not by shouting into it, but by stepping outside of it. And what they create from that distance echoes longer than anything born from inside the crowd. In a world obsessed with utility, the greatest act of rebellion is to be unusable. Nietzsche warned us, society doesn't want individuals. It wants function. It wants predictability. It wants minds that can be molded into tools. But the truly intelligent cannot be used. Not because they resist, but because they don't need what society offers in exchange. They don't seek validation from the crowd. They don't crave applause from institutions. They don't fear rejection from the collective. And that freedom makes them incorruptible. The intelligent person who refuses to bend is seen as difficult, arrogant, or dangerous. But in truth, they are simply complete. They are not waiting to be picked. They are not waiting to be welcomed. They have already chosen their own path, even if it's walked alone. Society cannot absorb what it cannot control. So it silences, shames, or romanticizes the intelligent after they're gone. But Nietzsche's warning wasn't about isolation. It was about power. The power of becoming someone who no longer needs to perform for the world. Someone who thinks beyond instruction, feels beyond permission, moves beyond imitation. In the end, the world doesn't fear intelligence because it's rare. It fears it because it cannot own it. And what it cannot own, it tries to erase. But you do not exist to be useful. You exist to see, to think, to remain intact, even when the world insists you're too much, especially then. If this spoke to something in you that's always felt one step outside, don't shrink back into silence. Subscribe. Not for the noise, not for the crowd, but to stay rooted in a space where thinking deeply is not a liability. It's the starting point. You don't have to soften your edges here. You don't have to translate your thoughts to be understood. You're not alone in seeing what others ignore. You're just ahead.